We have reviewed the availability management and the capacity and performance management practices in the start of this section, and the information security management practice was reviewed in the general management practices group. That leaves service continuity management to discuss to make our tour of the warranty of a service complete. The service continuity management practice looks at a particular aspect of a service. This practice addresses the consumer's or business's needs to either keep a service up and running or get a service restored after a disaster occurs. This is different than the focus of availability management. Availability management looks at the design of a service and identifies single points of failure. Then they come up with a set of plans to address resiliency and redundancy in the service to enable the consumer's expectations of service availability to be met. It's all about uptime. Service continuity management is different. This practice looks at big ticket items or risks that will certainly impact the business if they occur. Things like earthquakes, floods, civil unrest, governmental overthrow, fire, tornadoes. You get the idea. If any of these risks happen and the business is impacted, IT is going to have to respond. It's important for IT to know what risk the business is planning for and what they're going to do should a risk occur. Usually, the business is going to have to go someplace else, so we need to understand where the business will go to execute their plans. It's important for IT to know what the business is planning on doing should a risk occur and where the business will go to do it. The purpose of the service continuity management practice is to ensure that the availability and performance of a service is maintained at sufficient levels in the event of a disaster. As with many of the other practices, service continuity management relies on understanding what's important to the consumers and the needs of the organization as a whole. Most well-run organizations have a process that's performed by the business called Business Continuity Management, or BCM. The business continuity management process is usually executed by someone called a corporate risk manager. They're like a doomsday prepper on steroids. Their job is to identify various risks to the organization and come up with a set of strategies and plans to address those risks. For example, a company that has its headquarters in San Jose, California, may be at increased risk for damage from an earthquake. Someone in the business should think about the possibility that an earthquake could occur and plan or figure out what the organization will do should the big one hit. The chances are that if the headquarters are damaged by the shaking, staff may not be able to come to work there for an extended period of time. Perhaps they'll never be able to return. So what do? Close up shop and say it was a good run? No. They should have some type of contingency plan in place. Maybe they have other locations that are already mapped out with agreements in place where employees can go to work until things return to normal. When the business goes to their alternate location or locations after a disaster occurs, it's likely that they're going to need access to some of the services that IT provides for them to be able to resume normal business operations. Now, the IT organization can't tell the business what the business is going to do for a risk like an earthquake. Only the business can tell IT what it's planning on doing. Once IT knows what the business plans are, IT must work with consumers to understand how important each of the services that IT provides are. As you can imagine, some services are more important, and those services may never be allowed to be offline, regardless of whatever risk could occur. Other services are less critical, and in an effort to control our cost in service provision, the customer may agree that the service can be offline for up to 24 hours or 48 hours or greater than 40 hours, and so on. Once IT understands the importance of one service in comparison to others, IT can start coming up with a strategy and plans to either keep a service up and running during a risk event, like an earthquake, or IT can plan to get the service up and running within some agreed and negotiated time frame. The more important a service is, the more thought, the more effort, and money IT will likely invest in that service to meet our consumers' continuity requirements. To that end, the service continuity management practice provides a framework for doing a number of things, such as building organizational resilience that will allow IT and the services IT provides to survive a disaster, providing the capability for IT to respond to disasters and risks that have been identified, to help ensure that the value creating activities that are supported by services in an organization can continue to occur after disaster within the negotiated and agreed timeframes. By having this focus, service continuity management can help protect the interest of key stakeholders by ensuring that the services that IT is required to provide perform as needed from a continuity perspective. The service continuity management practice can help protect the reputation of the organization by keeping business critical services up and running post-disaster. And service continuity management can also work to protect our corporate brand. This practice can also be triggered when a service disruption like a major incident happens or some organizational risk occurs. IT's commitment to get a service restored after a disaster will vary from one service to the next, as some services are more important to the business than others. The key term that refers to the continuity target in an SLA is called Recovery Time Objective, or RTO. This is the maximum acceptable time following a service disruption that can elapse before a lack of business functionality will negatively impact the organization. For example, a service level agreement for our parts ordering and inventory management service may say that full service functionality must be restored within 24 hours from the start of a fire or an earthquake or civil unrest, etc. Of course, every service will be different. Very important services may have a requirement to be up and running always, regardless of whatever risk occurs. Other services may not be as important, so the RTO, or recovery time objective, could be 48 hours, 72 hours, or greater than 72 hours. It all depends on how important the service is and how much money the organization is willing to spend. The quicker the RTO, the more resources will be needed to support the service, and the more expensive the service will become. IT can do anything the customer wants. All it takes is money. Just know that the shorter the time frame for service restoration, the higher the price tag. A recovery point objective, or RPO, is the point to which information used by an activity must be restored to enable the activity to operate on resumption of service. For example, if daily backups of data are done for a service every evening, for the transactions that are supported by a service that day, a recovery point objective could be to have the latest backup restored by the end of the RTO. Disaster recovery plans are a set of clearly defined plans related to how an organization will recover from a disaster, as well as how it will return to a pre-disaster condition. Each of these plans should take into account the four dimensions of service management and not be limited to the technology only. Disaster recovery plans should be created for every service and should be tested periodically to ensure that they can support the recovery time objectives in an SLA. The last term that we'll discuss in this practice is BIA, or Business Impact Analysis. A business impact analysis is a key activity performed by the resources supporting the service continuity management practice. The BIA defines vital business functions and their dependencies. A business impact analysis is conducted to give the service continuity management practice an idea of the relative importance of one service over another. It's useful in helping guide discussions around continuity planning and can influence recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives, which ultimately make it into the service level agreement for the services that IT provides. This analysis looks at things like the financial impact of a loss of service, the potential risk of loss of life or limb, exposure of the company to fines and penalties, or loss of reputation. Any number of criteria can be used by the service continuity manager to help determine the importance of any given service. Both incident management and service continuity management talk about restoring service. So, what's the difference? Service continuity management focuses on dealing with events that the business considers significant enough to be treated as a disaster. Incident management will handle less significant events following the incident management process to get service restored. Every organization must define for themselves what constitutes an incident and what constitutes a disaster, along with the triggers for each. This slide shows some examples of things which might be considered a disaster and would be planned for by the service continuity management practice. You don't need to know each of these disaster sources, stakeholders involved, or organizational impact for the test. This slide is just provided for context and informational purposes only. It's meant to provide examples of the kinds of risk that this practice is supposed to address. Here we have the heat or action that the service continuity management practice provides for the different activities in the service value chain. Please review this page in your book in your own time. It's just a reminder for you that this practice will not be on your foundation exam, so you don't need to memorize this. Generally speaking, I would know that service continuity management supports business continuity management. IT doesn't make any decisions on service continuity all on its own. The IT organization must take its cues from the organization or the business. I would know that service continuity management is driven based on commitments that are made in service level agreements, and I would want to be comfortable with the idea of a recovery time objective and recovery point objective. If you knew that, you know everything you need to know about service continuity management at the foundation level. Even though this practice is not on the test, it's a good idea to understand how it works and supports the warranty aspects of a service.